An arrogant millionaire laughed in front of everyone and said, "I'll pay a fortune if anyone can translate this." What he didn't expect was that the cleaner he always humiliated would be the only one capable of revealing a millionaire's secret that changed everything. Hello, friends. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The morning sun spread itself across the skyline of New York, bouncing off glass towers and filling the streets with an almost deceptive brightness. Inside one of those towers, Johnson Imports, the air was anything but radiant. The tension that had been brewing over the last week now dripped from every conversation, every closed door, every hurried glance exchanged between employees. David Johnson's frustration was legendary, and when a contract worth millions had slipped through his fingers, his arrogance had turned venomous. He strode through the corridors like a monarch returning from a war he'd lost, but refused to acknowledge. His tailored suit clung to his shoulders, the navy blue cut designed to impress investors and intimidate underlings. His shoes tapped the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded more like a warning than a step. Workers scrambled out of his path, some pretending to shuffle papers, others ducking into offices. He relished the performance of fear. It reinforced the story he told himself about power. Near the end of the hallway, a cleaning cart blocked his route. Rachel Miller was bent over, her gloved hands scrubbing at a faint stain on the wall, a simple act of erasure that would go unnoticed by everyone but her. David's lips curved in irritation. Without slowing, he pressed his hand against the side of the cart and shoved it hard against the wall. The clang of bottles and brushes echoed in the corridor. Do you choose these spots deliberately, or is this incompetence some natural gift of yours? His voice was sharp enough to cut. Rachel straightened, her face flushed, though not entirely from embarrassment. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second before dropping again. "I'm almost finished here, Mr. Johnson." "Almost finished," he repeated, mocking. "And yet you managed to obstruct an entire hallway in the meantime. Remarkable efficiency. Perhaps next time you'll try blocking the elevators for variety." Laughter drifted from two interns standing nearby. Rachel's hands tightened on the rag she held, the chemical sting burning faintly against her skin. She wanted to answer, to remind him that dignity was not a privilege to be given or withheld, but the words lodged like thorns in her throat. She returned to her work as if he were already gone. To him, she might as well have been invisible. But David was already thinking of other matters. Inside his office, a thick envelope waited on his desk, stamped with foreign insignia and official seals. The assistant who had delivered it muttered something about Hungary before disappearing, as though the very papers carried danger. He slid it open with impatience. Dense blocks of text stared back at him, sharp black letters with diacritics he could not comprehend. Hungarian, apparently. He flipped through the pages with the careless air of a man convinced nothing outside his control could matter. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he muttered, tossing one sheet onto the desk. He pressed the intercom. "Lisa, get me someone who can read whatever this is." "Hungarian." The voice of his secretary quivered. "Mr. Johnson, I've already tried. We don't have anyone." "Then find one. This city is full of people who'll sell their souls for rent money. Get me someone who can string these words into English." Hours later, the documents still sat untouched, their meaning sealed. His impatience curdled into anger. At lunch, surrounded by a cluster of executives, he waved the papers dramatically. "Gentlemen, I have here what may be the secret to another fortune. Or perhaps a cursed grocery list, who knows? I'll make a deal. A month's salary, mine, for whoever can make sense of this gibberish. Any takers?" The room erupted in laughter. A month's salary to translate words no one understood. They treated it as one more of David's cruel jokes, an arrogant flex of wealth before an audience eager to laugh along. From the back of the cafeteria, Rachel Miller paused in her cleaning. She had been gathering abandoned trays, silent as always, but her hands stopped mid-motion. The letters she had glimpsed on the page, the peculiar rhythms of accent marks, stirred memories she had long buried. She knew the language, its cadence as familiar as her own heartbeat. For a moment, she stood frozen, invisible but alive with decision. Then she walked forward, each step daring the mockery she could already hear forming. "I can read it," she said softly, yet her words carried. The room fell into silence, followed by a wave of laughter that stung sharper than any insult. You? David's brows arched. The cleaning staff? Fascinating. Tell me, do you polish the words with lemon oil before deciphering them? Rachel did not flinch. She reached for the paper, her fingers brushing against the official seal. Eyes fixed on the page, she began to read aloud in Hungarian, the syllables flowing with perfect precision. Then she translated. This letter confirms that the estate of Istvan Kovacs, deceased, has named Mr. David Johnson as beneficiary to assets amounting to 15 million euros. The inheritance must be claimed within 90 days, pending proper documentation. The laughter died. David's face drained of color, though his arrogance fought to mask it. What did you just say? You've been left a fortune, Rachel replied, her voice even, her eyes steady on his. And if you wish to claim it, you'll need me. The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was the slow dawning of a reality no one had expected. The revelation spread through the office like a rumor born to run. By the time David returned to his office, whispers had already formed into speculation, and speculation into envy. The man who needed no one suddenly required the help of the woman he had most often dismissed. Rachel returned to her duties quietly, but the air around her had shifted. Some employees looked at her with newfound curiosity, others with ridicule sharpened by insecurity. For years, she had been a shadow, a background figure meant to blend into silence. Now, she had spoken, and in doing so, she had changed the rhythm of the day. Inside the sanctuary of the janitorial closet, Rachel leaned against the shelves and closed her eyes. Memories stirred like restless ghosts. She remembered lecture halls filled with eager students, the scent of chalk and old books, the thrill of unraveling complex treaties and translating delicate legal clauses. She remembered her voice echoing through auditoriums, explaining the intricacies of Slavic roots and Hungarian syntax. And she remembered the day it all ended. The university had called it downsizing, but she knew the truth. She had spoken against corruption in the faculty council, exposing the quiet exchange of favors and fraudulent grants. In return, she had been cast out, her reputation tarnished, her opportunities erased. When her daughter fell ill, she had taken the first job that would pay for medicine and rent. Cleaning had been supposed to be temporary. Years later, it had become her anonymity. A knock at the door jolted her back. Lisa, David's secretary, stood awkwardly, holding the stack of Hungarian papers. Mr. Johnson wants to see you. Now, Rachel followed her into the office. David was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp as he barked at someone overseas. He ended the call abruptly and turned to Rachel. Sit, he ordered. She remained standing. You speak Hungarian, he said finally, as though the fact itself was offensive. How? I was a professor of linguistics and a legal translator, she answered simply. He laughed without humor. A professor? And you choose to scrub floors for a living? I didn't choose it. Life chose for me. For a moment, silence stretched between them, brittle and uncomfortable. David's arrogance flickered under the weight of his need. He tapped the documents. You'll translate everything. I'll have these scanned, copied, whatever you need. Time is short, and if what you said is true, it is true. He leaned back, calculating. Then you'll help me secure this inheritance. In exchange, I'll consider your compensation. Rachel's eyes hardened. If I do this, it won't be for scraps. You mocked me in front of everyone, and you've treated me like I don't exist. But I'm the only person standing between you and 15 million euros. You'll give me 5%. Non-negotiable. David blinked, startled at her audacity. 5% of 15 million. 750,000 euros. For a woman who, minutes ago, had been polishing floors. His instinct was to refuse, to laugh in her face. But the papers on his desk carried weight heavier than his pride. He studied her, the quiet strength in her gaze, the steady resolve. Against his will, respect flickered, brief, reluctant. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. 5%. But if you fail me, you get nothing. Rachel inclined her head. Then I suggest you stop wasting time. As she left his office, David sank into his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt a sliver of unease. He had always believed control was his by right. But now control rested in the hands of the woman he had called invisible. And somewhere deep inside, a question took root. Who exactly was Rachel Miller? David Johnson had always seen himself as untouchable, the master of his empire. Yet the strange documents from Hungary had cracked something in his armor. He hated the sensation. It was like discovering a hidden weakness in his own reflection. He paced his office with restless energy, each stride sharper than the last, until the walls seemed to close in. The hum of the city below reached him through the glass windows, muffled but relentless, as if mocking the sudden fragility of his control. Rachel sat quietly across from him, stacks of photocopied documents spread on the table. She had removed her cleaning gloves and worn uniform jacket, leaving her in a plain white blouse that, under the fluorescent office lights, looked far less out of place. Her glasses perched low on her nose as her eyes scanned the papers, occasionally scribbling notes in the margins. "You're taking your time," David said, his tone barbed with impatience. "If you want accuracy, you'll give me silence," Rachel replied calmly, without lifting her eyes. It was not the sort of answer he was used to hearing, certainly not from someone he considered beneath him. For a moment, he opened his mouth to retort, but something in her composure, quiet, assured, impenetrable, stopped him. He poured himself a drink instead, amber liquid swirling in crystal. "Do you understand what's at stake here?" he asked finally. Rachel set her pen down and looked at him. "I understand more than you do. These are not simple inheritance papers. There are legal stipulations, cross-border conditions, and language that could bury you in litigation if you're careless." He frowned. "Then explain it to me." So she did. Her voice carried authority, each phrase measured and deliberate, as she unfolded the complexity of Hungarian probate law, international verification, and the looming deadline that demanded swift action. Every sentence pulled back a curtain, revealing the weight of bureaucracy behind the promise of 15 million euros. David listened despite himself. For the first time in years, he was not the most knowledgeable person in the room. He didn't like the feeling. By the end of the afternoon, Rachel had prepared a summary that made his head spin. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "So, I need immediate filings, notarized translations, and proof of lineage before the Hungarian court. And you're the only one who can do this in time." Rachel folded her papers neatly. "That's correct." A knock interrupted them. Lisa entered with hesitation, as though she feared the air itself might crack. "Mr. Johnson, there's a situation. Reporters have caught wind of the inheritance. They're asking questions." David cursed under his breath. News traveled faster than money. He waved Lisa away and turned to Rachel. "This is already spiraling. If I lose this inheritance because of some technicality, you'll lose it if you don't listen to me," she cut in. The words hung in the air, shocking in their audacity. Rachel hadn't raised her voice, but the force of her conviction silenced him. David stared at her for a long moment, his ego battling with the truth. Then he exhaled and said, "Fine. Tell me what I need to do." For the first time, Rachel felt the balance shift. She was no longer invisible. She was necessary. But necessity was a dangerous power, and she knew it would draw enemies as surely as it drew reluctant respect. The following morning, Rachel arrived at the office before sunrise. The city was still waking, traffic not yet choked with horns and exhaust. She carried with her a laptop, stacks of dictionaries, and a folder she had kept sealed for years, a relic of her past life as a scholar. David, predictably, arrived late, his expression sour from a night of restless calculations. He barely acknowledged her as he strode into the office, his phone already pressed to his ear. Yet when he ended the call and saw Rachel at his desk instead of her cleaning cart, his eyes narrowed with curiosity. "You look comfortable," he remarked dryly. "I intend to be efficient," Rachel replied, opening her laptop. "I've already drafted the first translation. You'll need to sign here, here, and here. These documents will serve as preliminary acceptance of the inheritance." He picked up the papers, scanning them with a frown. "You've already done this? I told you time is short. 90 days is nothing when you're dealing with international law." For once, he had no snide remark. He signed where she indicated, though his pride made the pen dig harder into the paper than necessary. Just as Rachel gathered the documents, Lisa rushed in, her face pale. "Mr. Johnson, we've received notice from Budapest. There are contesting claims to the inheritance." David's jaw tightened. "Contestants? Who?" Lisa hesitated. "Distant relatives of Mr. Kovacs. And someone claiming to be his widow." The words dropped like stones into the silence. David shot Rachel a glance that was part accusation, part desperation. This was supposed to be straightforward, he snapped. Rachel shook her head. Inheritances of this size are never straightforward. We'll have to prepare to fight it legally. Which means we'll need more than translations. We'll need evidence. Documentation. Possibly even DNA testing. David's temper flared. DNA testing? You think I'm going to submit myself to that circus? If you want 15 million euros, yes, Rachel said evenly. And if you refuse, the court will see it as avoidance. They'll assume you're not a legitimate heir. The silence that followed was thick. David's pride bristled at every word, but underneath, fear gnawed at him. He had mocked Rachel, belittled her, and yet she was the only one holding the map through this labyrinth. Finally, he said, then you'll arrange everything. Flights, legal contacts, the test. If I'm going to Hungary, you're coming with me. Rachel studied him for a moment. His arrogance was still there, layered like armor, but beneath it, she saw the cracks widening. He was no longer the untouchable king striding down marble corridors. He was a man confronted with the limits of his own control. Very well, she said quietly. But understand this. If we're going to Budapest, it will be on my terms. You wanted me invisible. Now, you'll have to see me. David looked away, unsettled by the calm defiance in her voice. For the first time in his life, he realized that his fate might rest in the hands of someone he had once considered disposable. And in that realization, something shifted, not yet enough to change him, but enough to unsettle the ground beneath his feet. The private jet hummed steadily as it crossed the Atlantic, its cabin filled with muted luxury. David sat at the head of the table, his laptop open, though he had barely touched the spreadsheets on the screen. His eyes wandered often to Rachel, seated opposite, her focus buried in a thick binder of Hungarian legal codes she had compiled herself. He hated the feeling. He was supposed to be the master of negotiations, the man who bent contracts and rivals alike. Yet here he was, dependent on the knowledge of a woman he had mocked only days earlier. Rachel flipped another page, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't intimidated by the silence or the weight of David's gaze. For her, every line of text was both shield and weapon, the language itself forming the armor she would need to protect not just David's interests, but her own bargain. Across the aisle, Lisa dozed lightly, her head set still in her ears. She had insisted on accompanying them, though her usefulness had already proven minimal. For Rachel, the secretary's presence was just another reminder that she was stepping into a world that had always excluded her, one where appearances mattered more than substance, until now. David cleared his throat. You've been quiet. I'm working, Rachel replied. Working, he echoed. That seems to be your answer for everything. She looked up at him evenly. It's what keeps people alive when arrogance would rather destroy them. The jab landed sharper than she intended, but she didn't retract it. To her surprise, David didn't explode. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the untouched whiskey in his glass. Tell me something, Rachel. Why did you never go back? You clearly had the credentials. You speak half a dozen languages. You know the law better than most attorneys. Why settle for this? Her gaze hardened. Because the world doesn't forgive people who tell the truth. When I exposed corruption at my university, I lost not just my job, but every opportunity afterward. Doors closed, reputations shattered, and I had a child to feed. Cleaning was the only work that paid reliably. Dignity doesn't put food on the table. David was silent for a long moment. For once, he didn't have a clever remark. He looked down at his glass, suddenly uneasy. The jet landed in Budapest under a sky bruised with twilight. The city greeted them with a mixture of Gothic spires and modern billboards, the Danube flowing like a dark ribbon between histories. Their hotel was grand, the kind of place David thrived in, but Rachel felt the weight of it pressed down on her. She wasn't here as a tourist. She was here as a weapon. That evening, they met with the first of David's Hungarian contacts, a lawyer named Martin Szekely. He was sharp, with the kind of charm that hid knives beneath smiles. He welcomed David like an honored guest, but when his eyes turned to Rachel, curiosity flickered. And who might this be? Martin asked smoothly. David hesitated, as though introducing a janitor in this setting would embarrass him. But Rachel stepped forward herself. Rachel Miller, legal translator and consultant for this case. Her tone left no room for doubt. Martin's smile deepened. Ah, then you are the one who holds the key to our labyrinth. The words stung David more than he let on. The man who had always prided himself on control was now an accessory in his own battle. Later that night, in the quiet of the hotel lobby, David confronted Rachel. You enjoyed that. She didn't feign ignorance. I enjoy being acknowledged for what I am. Something you've denied me for years. He clenched his jaw, but no retort came. He knew she was right. Alliances were forming, not by choice, but by necessity. And David, who had always divided people to conquer them, now found himself standing on ground he did not control. The Hungarian courthouse was nothing like the sleek offices David was used to. Its stone corridors smelled of dust and history, lined with portraits of judges long dead. Rachel walked beside him, calm and poised, her notes clutched in one hand. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the building itself acknowledged her presence. Inside the chamber, the contesting parties were already assembled. At the far table sat two distant relatives of Istvan Kovacs, faces David barely recognized from faded photographs. But it was the woman seated beside them who drew all attention. She was striking, draped in black, with an expression sharpened by grief and calculation. This is Erzsébet Kovacs, Martin whispered. She claims to be the widow. David bristled. Widow? Istvan never mentioned a wife. Rachel's eyes narrowed. That doesn't mean she isn't real. Or dangerous. The proceedings began. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, presided with the authority of centuries. Papers were presented, claims argued. The supposed widow produced a marriage certificate, worn but official-looking. Rachel studied it closely. Something about the seal, the ink, the formatting. It all screamed forgery to her trained eye. She leaned close to David. It's false. I can prove it. How? He whispered back. Trust me. She rose, speaking in fluent Hungarian. Her words cut through the courtroom like steel, precise and irrefutable. She pointed out inconsistencies in the document. The seal used a style that had been retired years before the supposed wedding. The language employed phrases no longer in legal circulation. Piece by piece, she dismantled the authenticity of the claim until even the judge leaned forward with interest. Erzsébet's composure cracked. She snapped something sharp in Hungarian, her voice trembling. David didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Rage, panic, defeat. The judge called for a recess, and the room buzzed with whispers. David turned to Rachel, astonishment plain on his face. How the hell did you know all that? Rachel met his gaze steadily. Because this is what I was trained to do. Because I am not invisible, no matter how much you wanted me to be. For once, David couldn't argue. He saw her, not as a janitor, not as a nuisance, but as a force in her own right. Yet even as the contesting claims began to crumble, Rachel felt a chill. Erzsébet had not come this far without allies. If her forged marriage certificate had failed, she would surely try something else. And Rachel knew that secrets, once revealed, always led to darker truths waiting in the shadows. The hotel suite overlooked the Danube, its waters shimmering under a restless moon. David sat in an armchair, his tie loosened, his face pale beneath the weight of the day's revelations. He had watched Rachel dismantle a fraudulent claim with the precision of a surgeon, and while relief should have washed over him, unease lingered. Rachel stood by the window, arms crossed, her reflection overlaying the lights of Budapest. Her mind replayed Erzsébet's outburst in the courtroom. Rage like that didn't dissolve in defeat. It metastasized, finding new channels, new weapons. David broke the silence. You humiliated her today. I exposed her, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. But humiliation breeds desperation. Expect her to come back stronger. David exhaled sharply. Why do I feel like this is spiraling out of control? Because it is, she said plainly. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. For years, David had thrived on the illusion of control. Now, he stood on the edge of a precipice, forced to follow Rachel's lead. The following morning, Martin delivered news that turned unease into urgency. Erzsébet's legal team had filed new motions, claiming David's lineage was uncertain. They demanded DNA proof before the court would proceed. David exploded. This is absurd. My mother was his sister. Everyone knows that. Rachel's voice cut through his fury. Knowing isn't enough. The court requires evidence. Without it, they'll delay until the deadline passes. DNA testing? David spat. Do you have any idea what kind of circus this will turn into if the press gets hold of it? Rachel met his glare unflinchingly. If you don't do it, you lose everything. That's the choice. There is no middle ground. The weight of her words pressed on him. For a man who had spent his life dictating terms, the starkness of a choice not his own was unbearable. Later that day, as they sat in a sterile clinic waiting for the swab, David turned to Rachel, his voice low. Why are you really helping me? Money alone doesn't explain it. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. She could have lied, could have hidden behind her usual reserve. But something about the vulnerability in his question made her answer truthfully. Because I spent years being erased. My career, my voice, my identity, wiped away because I stood against corruption. Helping you win this case is more than a paycheck. It's proof I still matter. That I wasn't wrong to fight back then. David studied her, a flicker of something foreign in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or guilt. He didn't speak again until the nurse called his name. When they left the clinic, Rachel felt the shift in the air. They had crossed into territory from which there was no return. Win or lose, everything would change. And she suspected that for both of them, the greatest battles were not in the courtroom but within themselves. The DNA results arrived 3 days later, sealed in a plain envelope. Martin opened it in the hotel conference room, his brow furrowing as he scanned the pages. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at his lips. It's conclusive, he announced. David Johnson is the biological nephew of Istvan Kovacs. The inheritance claim is valid. Relief surged through David, stronger than he expected. For the first time since this ordeal began, the fortune felt tangible, real. He turned to Rachel, almost giddy. We've won. But Rachel's expression remained cautious. We've won a battle, not the war. Ursabit won't give up. Her prediction proved correct within hours. The media descended, headlines plastered across Hungarian and international outlets alike. American millionaire claims fortune through Hungarian DNA link. Paparazzi gathered outside the hotel, their cameras flashing like gunfire. David soaked in the attention at first, slipping easily into his old arrogance, waving off questions with charm and dismissive smirks. But as the crowd grew, so did the hostility. Protesters shouted about foreigners stealing Hungarian wealth, while online forums filled with speculation about conspiracies and fraud. Rachel watched it unfold with quiet dread. Public opinion could sway courts more than evidence. If Ursabit's lawyers played the sympathy card, painting David as an opportunist exploiting Hungarian heritage, the tide could turn. One evening, as they returned to the hotel, a stone smashed against their car window. David ducked instinctively, cursing. Rachel pulled him down until the driver sped them away. The message was clear. This was no longer just legal warfare. It was personal. That night, Rachel confronted him. This is what I meant. Every action has consequences. If you keep flaunting yourself in front of cameras, you'll play directly into Ursabit's hands. David bristled. So what? I hide in my room while vultures circle outside. You fight smart, she countered. You let me handle the strategy. Otherwise, you'll hand them victory. The tension between them crackled, sharp and dangerous. David had built his life on refusing to take orders, yet here he was, faced with the undeniable truth that without Rachel, he was lost. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then David, with visible reluctance, said, Fine, you lead. Rachel nodded, though the weight of his words pressed heavily on her shoulders. Leadership wasn't something she craved. It was something thrust upon her by circumstance. Yet deep down, she recognized the irony. She had been invisible for so long, and now the spotlight, however dangerous, had shifted toward her. As she lay awake that night, listening to the muffled noise of protesters outside, she realized the stakes had grown far beyond 15 million euros. This was no longer just about money. It was about power, dignity, and survival. And she wasn't sure either of them was prepared for the storm still to come. The courthouse in Budapest seemed colder that morning, its marble walls absorbing the tension like a tomb. Reporters lined the steps outside, their cameras hungry, their questions sharp. David kept his chin high, his suit impeccable, but the flicker of unease in his eyes betrayed him. Rachel, walking at his side, carried not only her binder of notes, but also the burden of foresight. Today, she suspected, Ursabit would unveil her most dangerous weapon yet. Inside, The atmosphere was electric. Ursabit arrived flanked by lawyers, her black attire more theatrical than mournful, her expression sculpted into a mask of righteous grief. She carried a single folder, slim yet ominous, like a blade hidden in silk. When the proceedings began, Ursabit's lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he declared, "we submit into evidence newly discovered correspondence that calls into question Mr. Johnson's claim to this inheritance." The folder was handed to the judge. He opened it slowly, eyes narrowing. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Rachel leaned forward, heart thudding, as copies of handwritten letters were distributed. They appeared to be from Istvin himself, letters suggesting that David's mother had been adopted, not biologically related to the Kovacs family. If true, the DNA evidence would mean nothing. David would have no legal right to the inheritance. David's face blanched. "This is ridiculous. My mother was his sister." Rachel seized the papers, her eyes scanning the Hungarian text with meticulous speed. Something was wrong. The handwriting looked authentic, but subtle details, the phrasing, the grammar, didn't match the era. Istvin had been educated in a style that left distinct linguistic fingerprints. These letters read like a forgery written by someone who understood Hungarian, but not its historical evolution. She rose, addressing the judge in fluent Hungarian. Calmly, she dissected the letters, pointing out inconsistencies, the use of modern idioms that didn't exist at the time, the incorrect form of legal references that Istvin, a meticulous man, would never have miswritten. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. The letters were false. But then Ursabit rose, her voice sharp, her grief weaponized. "And what motive would I have to forge such things? Who benefits more than Mr. Johnson, the wealthy foreigner who swoops in to take from Hungarian soil what is not his?" The gallery erupted, whispers turning into angry hisses. David's jaw clenched, his pride bleeding into fury. For a moment, Rachel feared he would stand and hurl insults that would undo all her careful logic. She touched his arm lightly, a silent warning. The judge called for order, promising to review the letters thoroughly before ruling. Court adjourned with no resolution, leaving tension thick in the air. Outside, protesters swarmed, chanting slogans, their anger fanned by Ursabit's narrative. Stones rattled against car doors as David and Rachel were escorted back to the hotel under police protection. That night, David paced the suite like a caged animal. "She's turning the entire country against me. This is a damn circus." Rachel sat calmly, her notes spread across the table. "She's desperate. That means she's close to losing. Lies are the last refuge of the cornered." "Easy for you to say," David snapped. "It's not your name plastered across headlines as a thief." Rachel looked up, her voice measured. "You think I don't know what it means to be slandered? To be destroyed by lies? I lost everything because I exposed corruption. I've lived in shadows ever since. Don't talk to me about reputation." The fire in her eyes silenced him. For the first time, David realized she carried scars as deep as his own fears. Only hers had been invisible until now. And in that moment, though he would never admit it aloud, he understood. The battle for this inheritance was no longer just his. It was theirs. The final hearing loomed like a storm cloud over Budapest. Every legal maneuver had been exhausted, every witness questioned, every false document exposed. What remained was a collision of narratives, and only one would survive. Rachel worked tirelessly, drafting arguments, cross-referencing statutes, compiling historical precedents. Sleep became an afterthought, meals forgotten. Her daughter's photograph, tucked inside her binder, reminded her why she endured the exhaustion. Every page translated, every clause dissected, was another step toward the future she wanted to rebuild. David watched her with a strange mix of admiration and discomfort. He was used to people orbiting him, their efforts feeding his ego. But Rachel didn't orbit. She shone with her own gravity, pulling him into a space where arrogance felt small. One evening, as she pored over documents, David poured 2 glasses of wine and set one beside her. She glanced up, suspicious. "A peace offering," he said lightly. Rachel studied him, then sipped cautiously. Silence stretched before David spoke again. "I've been thinking. If we win this, you'll have changed my life. And I've given you nothing but contempt in return." Rachel set her glass down. "You gave me 5%. That's not contempt. You know that's not what I mean." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. Respect isn't a gift, David. It's recognition, and it's earned, not given. He looked away, the truth of her words settling heavier than the wine in his glass. The next morning, they visited Martin's office for final preparations. He laid out the strategy. We will argue the DNA evidence as irrefutable, dismantle the forged letters, and appeal to the court's interest in justice rather than sympathy. But know this, the other side will use emotion. Erzsébet will present herself as the grieving widow, the defender of Hungarian legacy. It will not be easy. David nodded, his jaw tight. Rachel, however, leaned forward. Then we'll counter emotion with clarity. Facts can be forgotten, but truth, once spoken, has a way of echoing. That night, Budapest seemed quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Rachel stood on the balcony of her hotel room, the Danube glinting beneath the moonlight. She thought of Sophia, her daughter, and the sacrifices that had led them here. Tomorrow would decide not only David's fortune, but also her chance at reclaiming dignity long denied. Inside, David watched her from the doorway. For once, he didn't see a janitor or an employee. He saw the woman who had become the axis of his survival. And as dawn approached, both knew. Tomorrow, there would be no turning back. The courthouse was packed on the morning of the final hearing. Every bench was filled, the gallery spilling over with journalists, curious citizens, and protesters who had found their way inside. The buzz of whispered speculation crackled in the air like static before a storm. David entered in his tailored suit, every inch the powerful businessman, yet his face betrayed the strain of the last weeks. Beside him, Rachel walked with calm composure, binder clutched firmly against her chest. To the untrained eye, she might have looked like a simple consultant, but in truth, she was the strategist, the compass, the quiet force that had carried them this far. Erzsébet was already seated, her dark clothes impeccable, her lawyers clustered like vultures around her. When her eyes met David's, they glittered with cold fury. The judge entered, and the room silenced instantly. Proceedings began with the usual formalities, then descended quickly into the heart of the battle. Erzsébet's lawyer rose first, delivering a speech laced with pathos. Your Honor, members of the court, Hungary is not for sale. A foreign millionaire arrives, waving papers, and suddenly he is entitled to the legacy of one of our own. No, this estate belongs to Hungary, to the family who has lived and died here. The so-called DNA proof means nothing if the lineage itself was manufactured. Applause rippled from the gallery until the judge silenced it with a gavel. Rachel leaned toward David. Stay calm. This is exactly what we expected. When it was their turn, Martin spoke with practiced precision, presenting the DNA results and official records. But it was Rachel who delivered the final blow. She stepped forward, her voice clear, her Hungarian flawless. You have heard claims of forged letters and emotional appeals designed to sway the heart. But law is not ruled by emotion. It is ruled by truth. The documents presented by Erzsébet were proven false. The DNA test, certified by this very court, proves beyond doubt that David Johnson is the nephew of Istvan Kovacs. To deny this inheritance would not be justice. It would be theft, sanctioned by deceit. Her words rang through the chamber, steady as iron. For a moment, even Erzsébet faltered. But then, in a desperate act, Erzsébet herself stood. Do not listen to her. She is no lawyer, no judge. She is nothing more than a janitor who cleans floors in New York. And you would let such a woman dictate Hungarian law. Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to Rachel. David rose before she could respond. His voice, usually dripping with arrogance, carried a new resonance. That woman saved me. She uncovered every fraud, translated every word, and without her, I would not even know this inheritance existed. If you call her a janitor, then you insult the truth itself. She is more than I ever was, because she sees dignity where I never did. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. David's admission, raw and uncalculated, struck harder than any argument. Rachel's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, letting his words hang in the air. The judge conferred briefly with his clerks, then delivered the verdict. The evidence is clear. The inheritance of Istvan Kovacs lawfully belongs to David Johnson. All contesting claims are dismissed. The gavel fell. Rachel closed her eyes, a rush of relief flooding her chest. David exhaled sharply, as though releasing years of arrogance all at once. Ursabet collapsed into her chair, defeated, her mask of grief cracking into rage. It was over, or so it seemed. The news spread across Hungary, then the world. American businessman inherits 15 million euros after dramatic legal battle. Reporters hounded them as they left the courthouse, but for once, David did not bask in the attention. Instead, he shielded Rachel from the crush of cameras, guiding her through the crowd with surprising care. Back at the hotel, Martin raised a glass of Palinka. "To victory," he said with a grin. David lifted his glass, but his eyes were on Rachel. "To the woman who made it possible." She met his gaze, startled by the sincerity in his tone. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Weeks later, in New York, the transformation was visible. Johnson Imports no longer felt like a kingdom ruled by fear. Employees whispered about the changes: higher wages, new scholarships for workers' children, profit-sharing programs that seemed unthinkable under the old David. And at the center of it all, Rachel Miller, no longer a cleaner but the newly appointed director of international relations. She walked the halls now with quiet confidence, her presence acknowledged with nods and greetings. The invisibility cloak she had worn for years was gone, replaced by recognition she had long deserved. In her office, a framed letter from Budapest rested on the desk, an honorary Hungarian citizenship granted to both her and David for their perseverance and contribution to cultural ties. It was more than a certificate, it was vindication. At home, her daughter Sophia hugged her tightly, tears shining in her eyes as she showed her university acceptance letter. "First place," Sophia whispered. "Medicine, just like I always dreamed." Rachel's throat tightened. For all the battles, all the humiliation endured, this moment made it worth it. David visited that evening, unusually subdued. He stood awkwardly in her modest living room. Holding a bouquet of flowers he seemed embarrassed to present. "You don't have to," Rachel began. "I do," he interrupted. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. "You gave me more than money. You gave me back my humanity. I thought power was about being untouchable, but you showed me it's about respect. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Rachel accepted the flowers, her eyes softening. "Then repay me by never forgetting what it feels like to be invisible. Because the moment you do, you'll lose everything again." He nodded, the truth settling deep within him. Months later, at a ceremony in Budapest, David and Rachel stood side by side as they received their honorary citizenship. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, but for once, David didn't care about the spotlight. He cared about the woman who had taught him dignity, and the daughter whose future now gleamed bright. As they left the stage, Rachel glanced at him. 15 million euros, she said lightly. And all it took was a little respect. David chuckled, a sound freer than it had ever been. Turns out that was the more valuable fortune. And for the first time in both their lives, the future stretched wide, no longer burdened by arrogance or invisibility, but defined by something stronger: redemption. If you made it this far, leave us a comment telling us where you're watching from today and what you thought of the story. If you can, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive new videos. A big hug, and see you tomorrow.